Why do 90% of people twist left? I've collected a small random sample from my local gym to help answer this question.
Which way you twist?
I twist this way.
I twist over my left side.
Left.
Twist to my left.
I twist to my left.
Left.
Over my left shoulder.
Left.
My left shoulder to my left side.
This is actually a pretty damn big mystery if you stop and think about it for a second. Why do way more people twist left? It's not like it's 50-50 or even 80-20. It's more like 90-10. This is way higher than chance. Something has to be causing this. There has to be a fundamental underlying reason why. And in this video, I'll explain what that is, its biomechanical origins, and how and why you should learn to twist both ways. Okay, to begin, let's start by talking about turning around. This is essentially the simplest form of rotation. Like, just imagine for a second you walked along the street, forgot your phone, and turned around to go back the other way. Nearly 100% of the time you'll turn the exact same way, and this is the way that you twist. The Derek Zoolander line,
I'm not an ambi-turner. I can't turn left.
is much, much truer than most people realize. Let's test this with my small sample here. When asked to walk down and turn around, which way do you think these left twisters turned?
What?
Wait.
That seems pretty compelling, but don't just take my word for it. Try this for yourself. Literally right now, pause the video and just walk back and forth in your room or whatever a few times and see which way you turn, and if it's the same way as you twist. Odds are you left twisters turned around left and you right twisters turned around right. Now, before we go further, this is not going to be 100% for reasons that are beyond the scope of this video. So if you are special, congratulations, you can leave a comment in the description. Now try turning just in the opposite direction and see how awkward that feels for you. Don't just take my word for it again, actually try that and see if it feels as good turning in the opposite direction to the one you normally turn in. Okay, so it's awkward. And it's awkward because you just don't know how to turn as well on that direction as you do on your good side. And the reason we're using this as an example is this is reflective of what happens in more complicated movements. Like, for example, trying to do a back full twist on your wrong side. If you don't know how to do it, it just feels powerless, awkward, and just not well controlled. But that's kind of obvious. Like, of course you don't know how to do it. Otherwise you'd be able to do it on both sides. But it's actually more significant than you might first think. What is it that you actually don't know how to do? What are you doing differently between the two? What are you doing in one direction that you don't do in the other? Which shapes are you making? Which muscles are you using? Which patterns are you recruiting? The first step to really understanding this more deeply is understanding this in the simplest possible context, which is the example we're using here, turning around when walking. And just to go off on a small, really important tangent here, this principle is super important and applies much more broadly than this. Many much more complex movement failures or difficulties have very, very simple origins. Looking for the simplest possible example of a thing you can't do well that scales up, learning to do that differently in that context and then going to progressively more difficult contexts is a fantastic way to break down more complex skills that you're struggling with. So that's why I focus on walking, standing, turning around, things like this, because those are the fundamental movement patterns that scale into everything else we do. Okay, back to twisting. There are actually a few different ways that twisting can be facilitated when you're turning around. And I can't talk about all of them in this video, so I'll just pick a few of the most common and most important factors seen in the people I have demonstrating in this video. 1. Center of gravity is important. If your center of gravity is already going in a direction, it's going to be so much easier to continue turning in the direction you're already going in. The movement is essentially unopposed. There's nothing holding you back. You just continue with the movement you were already doing. And then this becomes awkward when you're turning in the opposite direction because you then need to get your center of gravity back to neutral and then to the direction you want to go, which is 2 extra steps basically. And it's a lot more work to do. It's a lot more stuff to overcome. 2, hip position is really important, particularly their centrality. If your hips are more right, it's much easier to turn left, similar to the center of gravity in that you're already going in that direction. Your hips are out of the way. You can just naturally flow around yourself. If your hips are right and you're trying to turn right, they're in the way. They're literally a physical block that is going to stop you moving around in that direction easily. They're physically taking up the space that you need to be occupying to actually move yourself in that direction. 3, hip retraction is really important. If one hip is already retracting, it's essentially pre-turning you in that direction, making continuing that direction very easily. You just need to go with the already occurring movement. And for this reason, it naturally blocks twisting in the opposite direction. If a hip is retracted, you have to get it to neutral and then push it forward and then retract the other to facilitate the same movement that was already happening on the other side. You can pretty easily test this on yourself or someone else. Just get someone to stand square on 2 feet and push on the ASIS, this thing. Notice how one side is much easier to push back than the other. This is likely the hip that likes to retract on that person. This has a lot to do with your hip flexor muscles, particularly your psoas and iliacus. Depending which of those is tighter, can facilitate very different results in terms of your pre-twist. Most of what I've been talking about here so far is about psoas tightness, which is one of two hip flexor muscles. This is largely responsible for hip retraction, and if you have a dominant psoas, it's likely that you'll twist towards that side. However, it's worth mentioning that if you have a tight or dominant iliacus, the other hip flexor muscle, this will often look more like your hips turning back rather than retracting back. This iliacus tightness often also looks like hips moving sideways, as we saw in the hip centrality point, but also often a total loss of power in that leg as you turn back through a hip and the posterior chain gets disconnected. The difference between the two is actually quite subtle and hard to see, but very impactful in actual practice. Notice how in this example the hip is coming back, but it's just retracting. They're still connected through the posterior chain and can generate power here. Whereas here, it literally turns back, the posterior chain disengages, and it's very difficult to generate power and jump off this leg. And 4, lat dominance is also super important. These left twisters all have one thing in common. Right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
I'm right-handed.
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 Right.
I'm right-handed.
Right hand.
Left twisters tend to be right-handed because having a more dominant right lat helps with a left twist. Basically, when you twist left, you move your right arm across your body, lengthening your right lat. Having a dominant right lat means you're well connected to this muscle and are able to maintain connection and support as it lengthens, which means that when you tuck into your twist, you're very good at being able to pull back into that lat and pull your twist in. Trying to do the exact same type of movement with your left arm coming across and lengthening your left lat won't often work for right-handers because the left lat will lose its connection. It will lose support and you'll almost throw it away as you move this left hand over here. And this will impede your ability to pull into your twist. You won't be able to regain connection. And so for this reason, left-handers tend to be right twisters, but not exclusively for reasons I won't go into in this video. Let's look at some examples of these 4 principles in action among the athlete demonstrators we have here. Now, there's a lot of variability in these clips, so I'll go through these fairly quickly and just point out the things that stand out. Okay, visually for this first example, the thing that stands out to me the most is that the loading shape, the jump position, is very different on both sides. One works with the twist, but one works against it. On the good side, his hips twist in the direction he wants to go. He retracts his left hip, but it doesn't turn back. He can still jump off this leg. His hips are out of the way, and his right lat maintains good connection as it lengthens. On the bad side, there are a few issues. His left hip is still very retracted, but this is now hindering the movement rather than working with the twist. He never leaves this left hip retraction, and it really limits this movement. His hip centrality is very impacted. His hips have moved very far right, acting as a block to his right twist. This movement has also caused the loss of his posterior chain muscles, glutes, etc. You can see this through his knee position as it collapses inwards. The result of this is he can't jump well off his right leg and it loses power. Also, his left lat function is not great. It's more like a floppy flail rather than a leader of the movement. On this example, a lot of the things are the same as the previous example, just less exaggerated. His takeoff position on both the right and left side twists are actually very similar. This advantages the left twist and disadvantages the right twist. As well as that, the weight never really ends up functionally right and no extension happens through his left hip on the bad side twist. It stays at a very sharp closed angle. The difference in lat function is also particularly evident. Look at the power and connection in his right arm swing and how it locks powerfully in for the twist. This reconnection never happens on that left arm. It just kind of flops across and stays there. In this example, the left hip's inability to open on the good side is particularly evident. Look at how much flexion it's staying in on this wrong side twist. It's not opening up at all. On the good side, his left hip is retracting, not turning back, allowing him to maintain power and jumping ability through this leg, unlike this right leg where this is mostly just turning back. Look at how different these hip positions are. Turning back to the right hip, retracting back on the left hip. This example is more of the same thing, but slightly more subtle. The left hip doesn't fully open relative to the right. Look at the difference in air position. He's much flatter on this good side. The weight is also much too left on both these takeoffs. Getting weight onto the right leg while maintaining power is the challenge in a lot of these examples. This is an example of the movement done pretty well on both sides. The most obvious differences are in the arm swing. Notice the power and connection on this right arm coming across versus the left. On the left arm, he can't swing it much harder without losing the ability to pull back into this twist. It's almost like the arm is being left behind rather than leading the twist like it does on the right side. In this example, the movement is actually done pretty well on both sides, but we can really see the difference in dynamic reconnection ability between the two lat muscles. Notice the curving, then powerful straightening we see on this right side. This is generating momentum elastically. Whereas on the bad side, notice the fixed spine shape. It doesn't move dynamically. Keeping it in a fixed position is the next best option, but it can't add power to the movement. Also, the differences in hip opening ability dictates a lot of the ability to swing the back leg into this cork. Notice how much less he's able to open up through this left hip. This stops a lot of his power generation as he can't open it up to kick it through. In this example, the inability to open up through that left hip is really noticeable. Notice how much more bent the kicking leg is on his bad side. This is not giving him the lift he needs and gets on his good side to complete this movement well. Here are our last few examples that I won't talk about because I've discussed heaps already. But see if you can have a look for yourself and let me know what you notice. It's good to try and practice seeing this for yourself. Try with some of your own bad twists. It doesn't even have to be super complicated, just a spin on the spot is fine. Learning to do this yourself is just like learning any other skill. It's just a matter of practice, and ultimately will help you more than me just explaining it every time. Now back to our examples. The athletes who were the most capable of twisting on both sides were the least pronounced in their patterns of asymmetry, and this is no coincidence. This ambi capability, their ability to twist both ways, is a product of them being more balanced and better movers already, not because they've spent more time training twisting on both sides. They just don't have the same size holes. Like, yes, they might lean left a bit too much or have a hip that retracts a little bit. But if you look at the amount and degree compared to some of the other athletes, it's really noticeable how much better these patterns are. Like, look at the difference in walking symmetry and stability between these two guys. Neither of them have trained this or are trying particularly hard, yet one of them is obviously more symmetrical and balanced than the other. So you can probably see where this is going, but how could they and we learn to twist better on both sides? Start with simple movements. Walking, turning around, jumping on the spot. These same patterns show up in the simplest context and then go on to influence more complex movements. Like, look at this walking here. It's the exact same things. The hip is ending out too far right. The left hip is retracting. There's a center of gravity ending up left. And the right lat dominance is part of all three of these things. In your own movement, look and see which of these stands out to you as the most obvious. Then try and correct it in these simple contexts before trying to do it in more complex things. I'm talking taking one single step well or turning 90 degrees. And then and only then can you have any hope in hell of scaling these up to more complex contexts. And I think one of the big takeaways I'd like people to have from this video is that there's no special reason why people can't twist on both sides. It's just biomechanics. But more than that, the more you twist the way you know how, the more you reinforce existing patterns. And if these patterns aren't well balanced, you're setting yourself up for injury. Think context other than twisting. What shape do you think some of these athletes are going to make when they land a jump? It's going to be a lot of the same things again, a retracting left hip, hips moving off to the right, center of gravity going left. And this isn't the ideal way to deal with force in a landing. So I'd like to call out you, my audience, with the hashtag #OppoEverything. Whatever your sport, if you can do something on one side, I want you to work out why you can't do it on the other. And then learn it. Not so you can do it on both sides, but so that you can understand the fundamental underlying movement patterns that make it difficult. And to actually walk the walk here are some tricks from a washed out 32-year-old parkour athlete who first learned to backflip when he was 26. If I can do this, you can definitely do this. And these are still very imperfect, so if you can point out what I'm doing wrong, that's even better. And shout out to these amazing athletes volunteering their time and bodies to appear in this video. Here are some amazing clips from a few of these guys that you can check out on Instagram if you're interested in seeing more of these fantastic New Zealand athletes. That's all for this week. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, like, comment, all that, but you can do so much more. Tell your childhood friends about me. Attach flyers with my YouTube channel on it to cats in your local neighborhood and release them. Put post-it notes with my YouTube handle on your local library notice board. Whatever small gesture you think is best. Peace out.